Hello and welcome. In this episode, we'll be covering unemployment statistics. As unemployment rates spike from these coronavirus shutdowns, it'll likely become a popular topic, but surprisingly few people understand how these statistics are calculated and what exactly they are measuring. So in this video, I'll be walking you through where these numbers come from, as well as what terms like unemployment rate or labor force participation rate mean and what they don't mean. Most of the unemployment numbers that you'll find in the media or in memes come from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And if you want to find this information I'm about to cover on your own, I'll show you how to get there because it's a little bit convoluted. So type in unemployment BLS into your search engine and then go to the second entry here, overview of BLS statistics on unemployment. Should bring you here. Click on national unemployment rate. Brings you to this page where you click on unemployment and then how the government measures unemployment. This page is a fairly lengthy explanation of how the government measures unemployment, so if you wish you can go ahead and read through this on your own, but I'll save you some time and energy and cover the main points. All of the government unemployment numbers come from what's called the Current Population Survey, or CPS. Sometimes people think that the unemployment rate is based on some sort of comprehensive look at the entire economy or the entire country, but this actually isn't the case. It's based on a survey of 60,000 households, which is about 110,000 people, done every month by the Census Bureau. They break the U.S. up into 2,000 geographic areas, and then each month the Census Bureau selects approximately 800 geographic areas, which represents each state and Washington, D.C. Then each month they send out employees to conduct interviews either in person or over the phone. So it's not a total count of the entire U.S. population. That would just take too much time and resources to accomplish every month. But they do claim that they have a 90% chance that the monthly estimate is within 300,000 of what a total census would find. So it's the answers that the households give to these survey questions which determines if somebody is employed, unemployed, or not in the labor force. And we'll get into what those mean as they are not always intuitive. So we'll start with the overview of what the labor force is. Now, the BLS considers the labor force to be all the individuals who are employed and unemployed. So broadly, people with jobs are considered to be employed, although it's a little bit more complicated than that, which we'll get into in a bit. And then people who are jobless, looking for a job, and available for work are considered to be unemployed. So they have to meet all three of those criteria. And then those who are neither employed or unemployed are considered to be not in the labor force, which might sound a little bit strange, but they'll get cleared up as we clarify the definitions of each. So who is considered to be employed? Well, the BLS determines that anyone who works for pay or profit during the survey week is considered to be employed, whether that be full-time, part-time, or temp work. A person is also considered to be employed even if they didn't work during the survey week, if they were on vacation, ill, on maternity or paternity leave, had other sorts of family issues or on family leave, had a labor dispute, or couldn't work because of bad weather. In these cases, they are considered to be with a job but not at work. There's another category called unpaid family workers. This includes any person who worked without pay for at least 15 hours or more per week in a business or farm operated by a family member with whom they live. So example of this might be someone who performs chores on a family farm. They don't get a paycheck, but they're still considered to be employed by the BLS. So who is considered to be unemployed? Most people would assume that anyone who's not employed would be considered unemployed, but this is not the case. To be considered unemployed, one has to meet three pieces of criteria. They have to be not working currently, have actively looked for work in the last 4 weeks, and currently available to work. Actively looking for a job means contacting employers directly about work, attending job interviews, filling out job applications, submitting resumes, or other active means of search. So they had to do one of those within the last 4 weeks to be considered actively looking. Passively looking does not count. So passive job search measures might include things like looking for job postings online or attending job training courses. So even if somebody is out of work and they want a job, if they're not considered actively looking, they are not actually considered to be unemployed. So that brings us to the category called not in the labor force. And this includes those who are not employed or unemployed, which again wouldn't have made too much sense before we covered the definitions of those two, but hopefully that's cleared up now. So students, retirees, stay-at-home moms, these would all be categorized as not in the labor force. It also includes a category called marginally attached to the labor force. This includes people that want a job and they've looked for a job in the past 12 months and are currently available to work, but aren't considered actively looking for a job like those that are considered unemployed. And there's a subcategory of this which is known as discouraged workers. And these are those that are not currently looking for a job because either they believe that no job is available that suits them, or they lack training or experience for any jobs that are available, or they believe that they face discrimination in some way in obtaining a job. These two subcategories become important when we look at the different types of unemployment rates. And it's important to understand these two, particularly with the coronavirus shutdowns, as we could potentially have tens of millions of people out of work with no realistic job prospects potentially. So understanding the different categories of unemployment and people that want a job but aren't actively looking is important to understanding the statistics. So now that we have a background on these terms, we can go ahead and start defining the statistics that you'll see most commonly in media reports. Labor force is defined as the sum of employed plus unemployed. The unemployment rate is defined as the number of unemployed as a percentage of the labor force. The labor force participation rate is the number of people in the labor force as a percentage of the civilian non-institutional population 16 years and over. So with this, it's important to understand that the labor force participation rate includes the employed and unemployed, but it doesn't include people that are marginally attached to the labor force or the discouraged workers. And then finally, the employment population ratio. This is the number of employed as a percentage of civilian non-institutional population 16 and over. This is a much less cited statistic, but it's actually probably what most people think the labor force participation rate is. And this one might be important going forward, as the labor force participation rate could potentially stay pretty high, assuming we have lots of unemployed people looking for work, whereas in reality, the actual amount employed versus population could be falling substantially. It's also important to understand that there's different types of unemployment rates. The government classifies 6 different ones known as U1 through U6. When you see that the unemployment rate is, say, 5% or something from a media report, that is the U3 unemployment rate, which, as we discussed in the last slide, is defined as total unemployed as a percent of the civilian labor force. It's also known as the official unemployment rate. U1 is defined as persons unemployed 15 weeks or longer as a percentage of the civilian labor force. So this gives us an idea of how many people have been out of work for a while. U2 is job losers and persons who completed temporary jobs as a percentage of the civilian labor force. U4 takes U3 and then adds discouraged workers. U5 adds discouraged workers plus all the persons marginally attached to the labor force. And U6 adds all persons marginally attached to the labor force plus the total employed part-time for economic reasons. That is the subcategory of the employed, so people that are considered employed but they are only working part-time and they prefer to be working full-time. So now that we understand the different categories, we can see that U5 or U6 are still quite relevant depending on what you're looking for, even though they're seldom reported. Even with the record low unemployment rates in the last few months, we can see that the U6 is quite a bit higher at about 7.5%. So going forward, it's going to be important that we understand and are able to look at all of these different categories so we can truly see what's going on in the economy. Another term to be aware of is what's known as seasonally adjusted. Unemployment tends to spike in January and February due to the cold weather. Industries like farming and construction tend to not be working or not working nearly as much during these periods. It also tends to spike in June as students enter the labor force and start looking for summer jobs. And the BLS knows this, so they use past history of seasonal movements to estimate size and direction of employment movements and remove seasonal fluctuations. So generally you want to use what's known as the seasonally adjusted numbers, otherwise it could be misleading, as you could show a rapid fluctuation without the proper context. Finally, I want to clarify the difference between the unemployment rate and the unemployment insurance claims. When you hear something like 3 million people filed for initial unemployment claims last week, that's referring to the state's reports on the numbers of people that filed initial unemployment claims. If you add this to the amount of continuing claims, then you can get an idea of the total amount of people that are currently on unemployment. This is an important statistic in its own right, but it is different than the unemployment rates, the U1 through U6. And it doesn't capture all the people who potentially are unemployed, as it doesn't include those who might have exhausted their unemployment benefits or who don't qualify or don't apply for unemployment insurance. Thanks for watching the video. You should now be able to understand what unemployment statistics are saying and what they're not saying. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so. The next video will take this information and show you where you can find the unemployment statistics and how to interpret them. Till then, so long.